So hello everyone, we are going to talk about the past indefinite today, and I have looked through your digests. You did a very good job. There are some questions and there are some problems which we need to discuss together, and also we still have to write down our typical examples and draw the timeline so that we can keep constructing our past stories in this mathematical way, when we understand which action was first, last, next, happened earlier, was looked at from the point of the past, but what's going to happen in the future. So today we are talking about the past indefinite. And here we have the timeline. So this is the axis of time, this is the moment of speaking, and the future is going to be here and the past is going to be here. In the textbook, technically, our textbook gives us 8 meanings of the past indefinite. But if you noticed, there is nothing about the meaning number 8, because it's just a brief phrase which refers us to another section of the textbook, which should cause your suspicions, because obviously this is not quite past indefinite. This is something that looks like the past indefinite. And I would say that we count it as the subjunctive. We don't take it this semester, and then next year we are going to talk about that. So we are going to decide that the past indefinite has only 7 meanings. Now, the past indefinite is an analytical tense. That means that only its affirmative form is synthetic. When I say, for example, last year I worked at school, worked is the synthetic form, but as soon as you get the interrogative or the negative form, then you're going to get the auxiliary verb do. So, did you work? I did not work. So, we're going to stay here. This is our only point about the structure of the tense. Now we are talking about the meanings. So, the first meaning of the past indefinite is a single action in the past, which is something like you have a stone in your hand and you plop it into the area where you have the past story, and in your past story this is just a dot. It's just a point, an action which happened once, and now it is not looked at from the moment of speaking. No, it's just a single action. And you say, for example, last week I bought a camera. 2 days ago I went to the cinema. 10 years ago, I took a plane at 5 a.m. and it was awful. Or you say, for instance, if we take the verb burn and try to make all the examples with the verb burn, you can say, when I finished school, I burned all of my copybooks. And actually that's not true, because I didn't burn them and it still happened, and you shouldn't too. So don't burn the textbooks. But I burned my textbooks here. I took a plane here. I met a namesake on the plane. I found my keys in my pocket. So everything which is this single action in the past is going to be this meaning. Then the second meaning is a period of time which is over now. And unlike the past continuous, if we drew it as a past continuous form, we would have the wavy line here, but that's not true, because we don't look at it as if it was in progress. That would be the past continuous. So our past indefinite meaning here is going to look like this. So there was some action, it lasted for some time, and it's over now. It's not important anymore. It's just a fact about the past. For example, I can say, I worked at school for 3 years. This is true, I worked at school number 76, and it happened, it's over, right? Or you can say, I traveled for a year when I was young. Yeah, that was a year, but it is a fact in the past. I traveled for that year. Or you can say, I, for example, watched a film, which is a continuous action technically because it took 1 hour, but you don't look at it as if it was in progress. It's a fact. I watched it, I traveled there, I worked there. So this is the period of time in the past. So you don't pay attention to the fact that it's in progress, that it's continuous. You just say, it happened. Then the third meaning is a little bit more interesting. It's called a succession of actions. Now we remember from the present indefinite that a succession of actions is several actions together, and we look at them from the point of view that one happens a little bit after the other. So here we're going to have all these past stories when, for example, Julius Caesar invaded Great Britain, decided to turn back, went back to Rome and started a war. So that was a period when 4 actions took place, and these 4 actions are technically single actions in the past, which are seen as a succession. They are together. So, for example, you can say, I don't know, the Lord saw the letter, read it, tore the envelope apart, and burnt the letter. So all these actions took place one after another. Or you say Dr. Sanford woke up at 7, I don't know, fed his 20 cats, went to work and worked for 5 hours, which is going to be this, right? Worked for 5 hours. So a succession of actions in the past. Then the 4th action is a recurrent action. And this is the equivalent of a habitual action in the past for the present indefinite, but here something happens periodically with an interval. So you say, for example, when I was a child, which was a long time, right? When I was a child, every morning I woke up at 7. So every morning 20 years ago I woke up at 7, 19 years ago, 19 years and 364 days ago I also woke up, I woke up here, and this action kept repeating for some time. So this is a recurrent action. You can say every summer we burned grass, old grass from our garden in a large bonfire under the trees, which is not a very safe thing to do. Okay, my examples are really bad today. I didn't have time to write the script, sorry. So then, for example, you say, you talk about a memory, but for example, when you were at the kindergarten, and you say, when I was in my kindergarten, when I was a child, a small child, every day we had games. Every midday at noon we took a large cup of tea, for instance. Then we had 2 hours of sleep, and these actions are recurrent actions because they kept repeating. In the past, you had this repeated action. Then meaning number 5 was the biggest problem for everyone because it is unnecessarily complicated in the text, but I can just read it for you so that you feel proud of how complicated things were when you were making the digest. To express permanent actions which indicate continuous uninterrupted process in the past, given a general characteristic of a person or thing denoted by the subject. So I suggest that we make it much simpler. It's going to be a general characteristic of a person in the past. And to make this example easier, let's think about some famous person. For example, let's take Sherlock Holmes. And let's try to describe general characteristics of Sherlock Holmes. So this action is going to look like this. All the time when Sherlock Holmes lived, he had this characteristic. So, for example, I say, what was Sherlock Holmes like? He smoked a pipe, right? For like 20 years, 30 years. He played the violin, he solved crimes, he wore a special kind of hat, he had a friend, he drank a lot of tea, he liked his landlady, Mrs. Hudson, if I'm not mistaken. So all these characteristics, they characterized Sherlock Holmes at some long, continuous stage of his life, right? And you can use this meaning when you describe, for example, an old house where you lived when you were a child. You say, we lived in a house that stood on the hill. The house was surrounded, a fence surrounded the house. A tall tree grew by the door. and the house squeaked at night, like, you know, this unpleasant sound of a wooden place when the wind hits the walls. So you describe this past house and all these actions that generally characterize the house in the past. Also, you can talk about an old friend, for instance, or about a person you knew in school. For instance, there was a boy in my class who burned elevator buttons, and he bullied everyone, and he never apologized, so we didn't like him very much, right? So you have this example where you remember some person from your past, and you describe the general characteristics of this person. Or, for example, we had a teacher, and our teacher was a very interesting person. He was tall, he was strange, he was he asked very uncomfortable questions and always waited for the answer, and he played the guitar, and that was like one of his main characteristics. So now when I remember my teacher, I describe his general characteristics in the past. So your home task can be to describe one teacher which you had at school and then see what happens. So this is another past meaning. Then meaning number 6, nice, easy little meaning, an action which was in progress, and it looks exactly like the past continuous, but it is used instead of the past continuous with stative verbs. So verbs that cannot be used in the past continuous. For example, you take the verb understand, and it's not possible to say I am understanding. That doesn't work at all. So you say I understand what you mean in the present indefinite. In the past indefinite, it's exactly the same. Jessica said she understood what they meant. It's a point in the past. The understanding is longer than that point, but you can't use the past continuous. So instead of the past continuous, you use the past indefinite in this meaning. And meaning number 7 is a future action, which is surprising when you speak about the past indefinite, but it's not our future action, it's not here, right? It's the future for some person, for some character. So you say that there is a person here who, let's take a person, let's say here is our Jack the frog, and this person looks at some things which are future for this character, for this person. And then this character says that if or when something happens, something else is going to happen. So it's like a composite sentence, a complex sentence which Jack told us about in the story. So, for example, Jack said he would, burn his house when he inherited it. When he inherited is going to be this meaning of the past indefinite, a future action viewed from the past in adverbial clauses of time, condition, and concession, which is, if you remember, our invisible poster. The invisible poster. We never use the future in adverbial clauses of time, condition, and concession, right? Instead, we try to use something else. So this is the something else we are going to use here. So, for instance, sorry, the invisible poster fell away. So then let's take some verb and let's run it for all the 7 meanings, right? So that it is kind of better. Let's take some dark, terrible example. Let's take the verb to smoke, which is a regular verb, smoke, smoked, smoked. And we say, for instance, we need a single action, somebody who smoked and once, okay, I smoked a cigarette once and it had a terrible taste, for example. I never tried before that, I never tried later, it had a terrible taste, I smoked it once, a single action in the past. If we take the period of time in the past, we can say, for instance, my grandfather smoked for 20 years. And you can see that after that the doctors told him he shouldn't, right? So he smoked for 20 years and it was a big problem for his health. Smoking is terrible, people, don't smoke. I know that people who smoke now are skeptical about that. See you in 40 years. So then, if we take a succession of actions, let's take a detective story. For example, we have a classical noir detective from the 30s, and this George Gordon. So George Gordon entered the building, looked around, smoked a cigarette, and started work, for instance. So this effect of smoking, this is a single action, but it is part of the succession in the past. Recurrent action. Let's take a famous actress. Let's take, I think Agnieszka smoked a cigarette once a year, just to remember how terrible it is and how awful the mouth tastes after that. So she smoked, the actress smoked a cigarette once a year and didn't like it very much. Then in number 5, the characteristic. Let's take a famous character who smoked on the screen. Let's take Winston Churchill. So you can say Winston Churchill smoked a lot, right? And Sherlock Holmes smoked a pipe, for example. Bilbo Baggins smoked a pipe too, and Gandalf. A lot of characters smoked in the past. Now the rating shouldn't show you smoking in films. Then in number 6, we can't use the verb smoke because smoke is not a stative verb, so we need to use something like believe, feel, see, hear, love, admire, consist, include. You can say, for example, the camera included 3 parts and you had to assemble it yourself. So in this case, at the moment when you open the box, when you unbox the camera, you see that it included 3, you saw that it included 3 parts at that moment. Sorry, that's number 6. I'm too tall for this blackboard. Sorry. And then in number 7, we can say that, for example, the doctors, if you remember my grandfather who smoked for 20 years, the action of the period of time, for example, the doctors, so this is the doctor, Dr. Jack, told my grandfather that his health would give up if he smoked longer, right? So, and then my grandfather decided to stop smoking and everything was all right. So we can take any verb and run it through all these 7 meanings. So a single action in the past, we celebrated her birthday last week. The action which took place during the period which was over now. The Celts celebrated Halloween for 2,000 years. That happened for a long time. Then we can say we arrived home, celebrated our arrival, and went to bed. So that was a succession of actions in the past. The action which took, oh, that's easy. We celebrated my birthday in the forest every year because we went camping. So every year we celebrated my birthday. Then you talk about some character and you describe the general characteristic. You say, for example, Mr. Jones wore a yellow jacket and celebrated Hanukkah instead of New Year and Christmas. Celebrate is not a stative verb. This is not possible here. Meaning number 6 does not work with all verbs. And with number 7, you can say, my parents told us. For example, we have 2 characters here, my mom and my father, right? And I wonder which one is the mom and which one is the father. So my mom and the father told us that they would be very happy if we celebrated our wedding, for example. And then if we celebrated is the future action from the point of view of our mother and father, but it happened 20 years ago, so it's not very important anymore. And this is it. This is the past indefinite. So it is not a very easy tense, because if you remember, indefinite means non-continuous plus non-perfect. So it has to occupy all the territories of other tenses a little bit for the past continuous, right? And you need to be very clear when it is when we use the past indefinite instead of the present perfect as a single action. Because this single action is not important. We don't look at it from this point. But for example, I can say I broke my arm 10 years ago, right? 10 days. Or I, I drank a cup of coffee in the morning. But then if you look at this action from this point of view, and it suddenly becomes important, then it becomes the present perfect, because you can say, oh, my arm hurts so much, I have broken it. Or I can't sleep now because I have drunk 10 cups of coffee. So if you don't have this importance and this look at the past action from the moment of speaking, this is going to be the past indefinite. So thank you for your attention. I hope this was useful, and see you tomorrow on line 3 when we talk about the exercises.